Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending. We've just turned into afternoon here in Western Australia, where I am. And so I'm going to invite Michael just to set up the share screen and the presentation that I'm going to be walking with us through today. It's a great honor and privilege to be able to be here to tell a bit of a story at this wonderful Raising Peace Festival. The sense of telling a story, I just want to say a little bit about Pachibenni Australia, which is an organization that I'm part of. We are a sister organization of Pachibenni in USA. Pachibenni is the greeting that Francis of Assisi used with his followers, his friends and companions. A few centuries ago, it means literally peace and all good. And so it's a symbolic shalom welcome to everyone, and part of our mission in the work that we've been doing in Australia for the last 16, 17 years now is about education and training and in nonviolence and peace building. So we're a small community-based organization, entirely volunteer supported, and we just go where our passion for peace brings us and provide education training programs in response to people's requests. So Michael, if you just move the slide on, the next slide really is a little bit about the websites are there. Sorry, back one, Michael. We have our website addresses there, and these will also be available to you on our website, all the slides, so we can give you a reference to that towards the end of the session. But it's the Pachibenni Nonviolence Education Australia is the project that we started and initiated as a couple of members, Michael and myself, of Pachibenni Australia. And we had a vision to grow a network really of peace educators and therefore peace education in this region. So in this session, for the first 30 minutes or so, I hope to provide you with an outline of the story of what we've been doing so far, and sing a little bit about the context of the story and what we're learning as we go through this story of trying to grow and expand and a sense of networking and recruitment and establishment of a community of people interested in passionate about peace education in Australasia. So next slide, Michael. So we started with an inspiration, a dream, and that dream led to an aspiration that we would hope to achieve ourselves, that we could work towards, and then leading into operation. It's that sort of sense of movement. And I'll be speaking a bit more about this, I guess, trying to embed peace and nonviolence education into a system. So it's more about the systemic introduction to a system and how do we grow and sustain it within a system. So we started by sharing that dream, and I'll be speaking a little bit more about each of these in this first presentation session, and then giving about 10 minutes or so for you guys to have a chat with each other in some breakout rooms, and then come back for some more question, discussion, sharing before we conclude in our 60-minute session today. So from the dreaming and inspiration, we started to share that dream around some others. And from that, we founded a steering group or a founding group who shared our passion and who had some influence within their own school systems. We sought out and found some seeding resources to help us get some introductory units going. And we provided some professional learning then as for teachers and educators who would be interested in trialing and piloting these initial curriculum resources. The 3 units actually we developed was an introductory unit for upper secondary and one for upper primary, and then followed up with a second unit called War and Peace. And we're going to have a short look for 4 minutes at the Soldiers of Peace trailer, which is one of the video resources we use in our introductory unit. And then we'll provide you with some teacher and student feedback that we have received. So that's the plan for the next 25 minutes or so, to go through that story and share that with you. Thanks, Michael. So our next slide starts with inspiration. And for some of you may be aware that the first decade of this new millennium was the United Nations Decade for a Culture of Peace and Nonviolence for the Children of the World. So it was during this time that I had quite a formative experience around understanding of what peace and nonviolence education might look like. So that was a real beginning point, and trying to build on the awareness raised by that UN decade. Next, Michael. And when that decade finished, there were also a number of organizations that grew out of that, that also provided further inspiration and aspirations for us here. The UN decade, following the UN decade for Culture Peace, the World Council of Churches Decade to Overcome Violence, the Global Campaign for Peace Education, the concept of the Great Turning, introduced by Joanna Macy and a guy called David Corton, the sense that the planetary evolution and maturing around how we deal with conflict, and then the Culture Peace network growing out of the UN decade. Thanks, Michael. For Catholic schools and Catholic education systems in which we have significant influential networks here. We had a couple of papal statements that provided further inspiration. On January the 1st, 2017, Pope Francis issued a statement on nonviolence, a style of politics for peace, in which we sort of latched on to his words there as being very significant for Catholic education systems and other Christian and Anglican education systems here in this region. So we thought that if Jesus was teaching nonviolence, how many people actually know about these teachings and how might they embrace them in our education systems? And then also, a year later, 2 years later, Peace is a Journey of Hope. Sustainable peace can be based on global ethics. So that was a sort of a sense of making a connection between the very specific words of Pope Francis and the notion of a global ethic, of interconnectedness, providing further hope to recruit people within our education systems here. Thanks, Michael. Also, one of my favorite authors, John Paul Lederach, wrote a book called The Moral Imagination back in 2010, in which he described that as the capacity to imagine something rooted in the challenges of the real world, yet capable of giving birth to that which does not yet exist. So the concept of how might we help people understand that a culture of nonviolence is achievable, attainable, possible, when people are quite cynical about how that might work in this world that we live in today. Thanks, Michael. So our dream sharing group here, the people that we gathered in this initial sharing group, Patchy Bentley, I've already referred to, Catholic Education South Australia, Edmund Rice Education Australia, the Anglican Schools Commission in Western Australia, and the Anglican Schools of Aotearoa and New Zealand became part of the steering group to introduce these prototypes and trials within their school systems, not so much the whole school systems, but from influential people within those systems who were able to encourage and support teachers who may want to trial some of our units. Thanks, Michael. So we needed some seed funding, and we applied to ArtThink, which is the Australian Research Theology Foundation, for a seeding grant of, I think it was about $10,000 we got to help us engage a curriculum designer, writer, and do the admin work around that to help get our units developed. That got us going. So we had something to offer people who were interested in teaching peace. It wasn't necessarily just, oh, well, that's a good idea, but what can we offer you by way of resources? So we got that. We're very grateful to receive that seed funding from ArtThink. Thanks, Michael. We then started to think about teacher development, professional learning. So we had two conferences or gatherings. We had one in 2018 in Adelaide, and then the following year in 2019 in Melbourne. And we had planned to have more of these, but the moment COVID sort of prevented us from moving on with the plans of having face-to-face, but we've substituted some smaller scale professional learning opportunities over Zoom. So moving on to the actual curriculum itself and the design of the curriculum, it's based on 4 touchstones that through our many years of providing education, training and learning programs in nonviolence seem to be important to incorporate in our curriculum. The first of these was about knowing ourselves and being aware of ourselves, and where we have the capacity and in terms of our culture of origin and our families of origin, and in our own personal development, we have capacity for both violence and non-violence. And how do we language this and name this within ourselves? How does our culture work to what Walter Wink referred to as the dominant culture in which we live? Has a propensity for resolving a lot of its conflict issues by violence and war. So what's the forces of culture that affect non-violence and violence, and how might we become more aware of them? Spirituality, how might we sustain ourselves when the going gets tough, when it becomes difficult to sustain ourselves with a commitment to non-violence while being confronted by destructive violence? Whatever that source of spirituality or sustainability is within each person, and then what skills can we grow and learn to help sustain our commitment to non-violence. So those were the 4 building blocks, if you like, for our curriculum design and development. Thanks, Mike. So the first unit, 10-session unit, we call it Nonviolent, the Theology and Practice of Peace and Nonviolence, over 10 sessions. With the premise that certainly in Christian faith-based schools, that non-violence is central to the gospel of Jesus. We had initially exploring terms, creating a shared meaning around vocabulary and language. So what does this mean for different people? The culture of non-violence, where does violence come from? We used the work of René Girard and scapegoating and mimetic desire, translating that into meaningful language and experience for students, and the myth of redemptive violence by Walter Wink. And then we sort of looked at the gospel and lived the example of Jesus, showed some stories that illustrated how he was committed to non-violence in the face of violence. We then brought in other inspirational stories from both national, local, and international stories of non-violent peace building and peacemaking. We then set up a skills development program called the 5 Steps of Nonviolence, where we learned about being able to be aware of what was happening in us when we were getting ready to become violent or to confront violence, centering processes, listening skills, truth speaking skills, and being able to formulate a bigger truth outside of different perspectives. So being able to incorporate the complexity and different truths in any situation. And then we invited students to undertake a project. So I'm happy to talk more about any of these specific individual curriculum areas beyond this initial presentation for those who wish to. So that was over 10 sessions. And then the second unit, thanks, Michael, sorry. You moved it on and I stuttered. The second unit we developed was War and Peace. So again, just to try and provide an alternative to the dominant culture patterns. So what we were trying to do was increasing students' awareness, understandings about theology, and also how war is practiced in the world. So they could end up forming their own view of where they stood on this, and basically provide them with some tools and skills and a framework for making an informed decision about whether they supported war and under what circumstances, and how they might become aware of other alternatives. So that translated into a curriculum model again, thanks Michael, of 10 sessions. Again, vocabulary is important, getting people understanding what we mean by the terms historical and contemporary ways of killing. This is quite powerful when we start looking at how sophisticated the war machinery is becoming and how the killing works in war, and to bring the reality of that into people's mindsets when we're discussing this. The nonviolent alternative, what did that look like? Again, coming from the example of Jesus, but also case studies and research from around the world, different ways that people have responded. For example, the nonviolent peace force going into situations of conflict using nonviolent techniques. Looking at Australia's role in military conflicts, what the alternatives might be, and then some review and reflection and some extension work, so that the idea being that at the end of this unit, students would have the capacity to have a stated position themselves on whether what their view was on peace and nonviolence and war. Thanks, Michael. So one example that we use as a core part of the curriculum in the introductory unit is acknowledging the reality of the violence and the destructive conflict that people see every day, both in terms of the broader world, but also how does that show up in your classroom, in your school community, in your family, trying to make that link between the bigger picture and the closer picture. And the documentary Soldiers of Peace was a good way to help students come to understand about the transformative processes that can happen when people actually start asking questions about, is this the only way that we can sort out our problems through this type of violence? So we're going to have a quick look at the trailer for that movie now, and just to show you how we use and embed this resource within our curriculum learning. Thanks, Michael.
Sorry, I may not have ticked the sound box. Let me just go back to this.
How do we get around being human? That's the essential argument of peace.
There were people in the hotspots and trouble spots of the world who devised brilliant ways of lowering tension.
For 4 months, we worked with the Christians and Muslim religious leaders to sign a peace pact. Amazingly, they all agreed.
Peace is breaking out in places where people who have experienced war firsthand.
You can't get peace with a gun. It's impossible.
Nuclear weapons are useless. You cannot use them for any military purpose. The threats we're supposed to be facing, which are terrorism, can you use a nuclear weapon for that? Can you drop a nuclear weapon on a terrorist?
We have restarted an arms race. I think it's an absurdity that the world is spending $1.3 trillion on defense industries.
Well, there are those who don't want peace.
If humankind is going to survive, we'll have to break the habit of war. The violence over precious land and water is so fierce, it's not safe to leave their village.
So we've had incidences of young boys who are initially being involved actively in the violence, now retreating back and saying no to the elders, and they're not taking arms anymore.
If we could eradicate poverty and give people a sense of worth, a great deal of conflict would end. It would not even begin.
It's remarkable that I met Jo and I killed her father, but that she is still willing to meet me, and we both still recognize that it can be a benefit for us both.
He said to me, "I'm sorry I killed your dad."
Here's an AK-47 that kills people, now it's a guitar that entertains people. That's wild.
We will see more and more people networking, talking across territories, thanks to internet and other means, coming together to build a culture of peace.
I used to think before, very conveniently, that peace was something someone else did, as is war. War is something someone else did, and it has no impact on me. What can I do? What can we all do? How can we all own the peace of peace?
I've lived with that fear for long, and I thought at one point that I need to do something myself personally, and I took the initiative.
Y decir, yo estuve en la guerra, pero hoy ya como, ya no soy el instrumento de guerra, sino el instrumento de paz.
And now we are happy. We are getting our time.
Why are we so stupid for so long?
Thanks, Michael. So that's just part of the resources that we build in to try and invite students at an early stage in the process of the units to have an understanding that there is an alternative way, and that there are people out there in the world witnessing and experimenting, exploring different ways of engaging with destructive conflict, so that there's a sense of going back to that original slide that I showed about inspiration, aspiration, operation. Who or what inspires us to aspire to a different future than what we're currently experiencing, and how we can turn that aspiration then into operations. So it's those three movements that we're trying to do here in our early stages, our peace education project. So in terms of some of the teachers who actually trialed the unit and the units, and sometimes it was like over a semester or a term, or in bits and pieces mixed in with other units, depending on where they could get the opportunity. We managed to invite them to provide us with some feedback at our Peace Education Symposium, and these are some of the responses from Year 12 students. So just have a read of those. And as I say, these are all on these slides will be on our website. We'll give you the link to that. Thanks, Michael. and also then now from some of the teachers who taught that unit, some of their feedback. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Michael. So one of the things that I would say is that in terms of developing peace education curriculum, there is no one way of doing this, and there is no template for this that we can apply globally, that there needs to be a sense of creating and designing curriculum according to context. So I think that's pretty well it for the sense of what we said we would try and do in the initial 30 minutes or so. We'll keep that slide to the end, Michael, when we come back again. So in a sense now, to give you a chance just to have a bit of reflection and discussion around what we've presented as our story of what we're trying to do with our small yet passionate and dedicated network of peace educators here in Australia and New Zealand. It's a slow start, a slow beginning, and we're just still working on the sense of having some curriculum resources to offer to be applied in a wide range of contexts, whether they're integrated within other units or whether they just can take some themes out of these curriculum units and put them into shorter lessons or retreat programs or whatever fits that school. And then the language and context needs to be speaking very clearly to the cultural context in which we're trying to develop the peace and nonviolence education programs themselves, and recruiting volunteer teachers and educators, because we're not yet at a point, I don't know when we would be, where we can actually get systemic backup for this and actually get systemic, more senior levels of systemic influencers and decision makers saying, yes, well, let's have peace education as a mainstream part of curriculum right across our system. That might take a little while. So, Michael, back to you to set up some breakouts for the next 10 or 12 minutes or so, and then we'll come back for a further conversation. Thanks. Well, welcome back, folks. I'm unmuted now, so I think you can hear me. Really trying to, Michael, if you can sort of pick up anything in the chat box, that might be of interest, and we had a great conversation about the nature of peace education and the longer term hopes and aspirations that we might have, and this sense that there isn't one size fits all, but there is a need to, I think the language that I use around part of my passion for this is a question. How do we create the conditions where sustainable nonviolent peace is possible? And there are many conditions, I think, necessary for that. That's probably a whole other conference. But certainly in terms of peace education, how do we create the conditions where peace education becomes part of mainstream education and curriculum, is partly trying to do with some of the things that I've mentioned, recruiting others, creating resources to make it easier for teachers to use, and sustaining and expanding the networks of interested people around that. So,
Brendan, I'm wondering if people have any questions, would you be happy for them to drop it in the chat box, and you'll be able to see that, won't you? Or do you want me to yell them out to you?
Yeah, if you can yell them out to me, and then I don't have to keep.
So far, Diane, I've been responding to a couple of questions as we've been going along. Diane asked a question about adapting this for secular delivery, because this grew out of a Christian theological background and context. Not something I've given a huge amount of thought to myself, but there are some generic peace education websites, very good ones on our website, Peace and Nonviolence Education. So if you go to that website and look in the tab which says other networks or networks, there's some good sites there which would have resources, I think. Sue's just popped up a resource link there. Thanks, Sue. And if you've got any good networks that you've found great in this space, peace education, feel free to drop them in the box.
I certainly referred to the Global Campaign for Peace Education. That's a great website, lots of resources there and weekly updates. And the Culture of Peace Network News from the UN is also wonderful. There's such a lot of resources around. I think that the key is working with whoever cares enough in your own constituency, your own context, to create something that's meaningful and relevant and makes sense. And there's also professional education context, so that teachers can pick it off the shelf almost and start teaching something that they know that is appropriate and relevant to their context. So it's exciting to look at. There's so many. I mean, in terms of curriculum design and development, there's so much out there that the hard job is actually culling it down to something like 10 sessions or something, 60-minute lessons or whatever. Anything else coming up there?
Brendan, Diane's asking about implementing programs online, question mark.
Yes, I was just wanting to ask a question, which is, this is something that I think is, really important, building this into the curriculum, but I just wonder how it can be done successfully, as opposed to having it too much as a separate activity.
Yes, thanks, a great question. One of our partners in our Dreaming group, the Catholic Education of South Australia, have done just that. They don't use it it's not as a separate unit, but what they've taken is the key concepts that we have built our curriculum on: self, culture, spirituality, and skills. They've taken those key concepts and then overlaid them onto their religious education curriculum K-12, and so they have put them in as key understandings and points of learning. So that's a much, for them, that's the way they were redoing all of their whole systems religious education program, and so they've embedded and integrated the themes rather than have them stand alone as separate units. So happy to, if you wanted to introduce you to or set up a conversation with Michael Vial, who's the head of Director for Religious Education at South Australian Catholic Education, and talk more about that.
I think the other thing that Margot is that I've experimented as a chaplain at UWA, University of WA, is as a practice of peace, is using consciously using talking circle process for meetings. So and it's a very simple to do that. If you've ever used a talking circle with the talking piece, is I just create a PowerPoint slide which actually has a visual representation of everyone in the circle, so that they actually imagine a circle, and then we have a virtual talking piece. So as it goes around, people hold up their talking piece at home and I've got the talking piece in my hand, and then they speak, and then they pass it on to the next person, which is kind of fun and actually works incredibly well. Couple of more questions in the box. Rodney, peace be with you. History missing Jesus Christ's kingdom of peace is costing humanity the earth. All of creation is longing for the day our world is determined peace rather than destined by violence, greed, prejudice, and vanity. When every follower of Christ understands they represent his kingdom of peace here on earth, will influence a better world. Do you think it's strange we don't learn heaven's name? I'll take, as Tony Jones says, thank you. I'll take that as a comment. Causes of poverty, Brendan?
I was just going to like the comment about the question. Teachers have been very busy and so on. I think that's true. This is part of the struggle to try and integrate anything else within an already overcrowded curriculum and very overworked teachers. We're hearing this all the time. So again, in the world of nonviolence and great turning transformation, slow is fast. So we've got to recognize that we cannot use a violent process to promote and teach about peace and nonviolence. So we've got to work with the realities of what we've got and who we are, and work on the basis of it might take a bit longer to embed this. Let's go with the first step, which is getting people aware of it and knowing about it and giving them some resources that they can try it. And then hopefully they do become champions within their own local school. We have one school in Adelaide that wants to declare itself as a zone of peace and nonviolence. They're at a point where they're saying, wow, we like this stuff. We started to teach it. It's having an impact. What do we do next? What would it look like? That's the question, because we don't know what it would look like. But what would it look like if we declared ourselves publicly as a zone of peace and nonviolence, that this school community, this school campus is publicly declaring itself to be that? What would that mean for us? So we're just beginning to ask and engage in that question right now.
Yeah, Brendan, Wise has asked a question. I often hear the curriculum is already overcrowded and that schools cannot address all ills in society. How do you engage schools to make this a priority and sustain it? It's a fantastic question. I don't know the answer from a curriculum perspective because I'm not in the school system, but one of the really interesting things I think that's happening is positioning peace as in the context of what is increasingly being known as relational schools, which is drawing on restorative justice and restorative practices and embedding them as a way of doing relationships from in every aspect of the school's life. So it's in the same way that Brendan just talked about a school declaring itself as a zone of peace. Some of the tools and frameworks for that is to use the construct of relational schools, drawing on restorative justice. There's some great networks around. If you look up restorative schools, relational schools, this stuff. That addresses to some extent another question too about how you position peace education in a secular environment. It can be framed as relationship enhancement. How do we build, maintain, and repair relationships using non-violent processes like circles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Brendan, question you posed earlier on, is this the only way? Is a really important one right now with the tensions with China and dangerous military responses. That message of looking at non-violent options is so important right now. It must be posed where we can. Thanks, Sue. So one of the interesting things we try to do with the curriculum work is to get teachers drawing on stuff that's live in the media right now and then making connections with the curriculum. So that's a great example of pulling on something that's really topical and reflecting on it through a peace ed lens. We've only got 4 minutes left, so afraid I'll have to leave the rest of the questions, great questions, standing.
So thanks, Michael. We just had that sense of, I continue to emphasize, until we get to a point of systemic buy-in, and we have in our Ministry of Education, we have a Department of Peace or Peace Education, then the reality is that we're relying on connections that we make personally and interpersonally with people of some influence in some parts of the system to try and grow this. It may be that in another 5 years that might be different. So we bloom where we're planted and keep trying and keep working on this and learn as we go. And I think one of the things would be great to try and capture some of the stories that we don't yet know about that are happening around the country, because peace education covers so many things, and whether it's restorative practices and or talking circles and or immersion programs and overseas immersion and so on, and working with Indigenous cultures. There's so much happening. It could all fall under the umbrella of peace education, peace studies. So we're just trying to sort of bring that into focus and aim at non-violence.
Yep. So we need to wrap it in a couple of minutes. So a couple of things to finish. These PowerPoint slides will be available at the peaceandnveducation.org website, which we'll put in again in a moment. We have been asked to wrap this up tightly at 1 o'clock because some people are going off to other sessions. And there's an offer if anyone is desperate to hang around for another 5 or 10 minutes just to ask residual questions, please. You're very welcome to do that. Brendan and I will stay. And if you've got any final comments, thoughts or observations, whack it in the chat box now. And
there's just one final slide, Michael, while people are thinking about that. If you could go to that final slide, which is, the slide is it's 2 minutes. It's entitled, There is no peace without peace education, which comes from the Cyprus in 2019, the gathering of peace educators around the world. This is encouraging because it also means that we're not alone in this endeavor, in this aspiration, and that there are people operating at various levels. And here is the message to them, from them, which I find both very encouraging, quirky, hopeful, and very beautiful and peaceful. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. I loved your company. Thank you.
Don't cut us off before we can save the chat, please.
No, we'll just play this slide and then come back.
I will also, Brendan wanted to put your email address in the box too. If anyone wants to be on our contact list, can you whack your email address in the chat box, please, Brendan? If you've got any questions for Brendan, email him. If you want to go on our contact list for updates, which we put out periodically, email Brendan and we'll do that for you.
Brendan.
Yep.
I've just got a question. In terms of what's happening now, of course, there's some very, very creative work, but also you're probably aware that, there's been, creative work in the past, both within the Catholic system and in the government system. And I'm thinking of the work that was done by people like Rod Lacey, Chris Heffernan, resources for schools, which were used in the Catholic system. And there were also materials that were produced for the government government schools. Those materials included materials for the primary education and also for the secondary schools. Now, I'm talking about some time ago, but sometimes, you can actually draw upon things rather than just sort of reinventing the wheel. So I'm just, raising that with you.
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, look, I think we all in some way stand on the shoulders of those who've gone before us, that's for sure. And I think that we integrate the learning that we have from exposure to previous resources as well. And I think, though, that it's really key and important that we develop resources that are creative and speak to the current generation of young people. It's very different from, I taught as a teacher like 45 years ago, and so I certainly would not many of the skills that I was taught then, or content-wise, certainly wouldn't be appropriate these days. So we're continuously just trying to modify and change and reflect and respond to, like Michael said, using the current real world in which we're living to design curriculum. Like, for example, we had a Zoom meeting with teachers to talk about the question of consent when we had the Brittany Higgins story reverberating around the country. So what would a non-violent approach to dealing with that issue look like? So we're continuously trying to make our peace and non-violence education a live learning process, which relies on teachers having some understanding of where this comes from in terms of a depth that is beyond the content. So I think that's what we really would love to keep focusing on. How do we get teachers to get to a deeper understanding of both the theology and the ideology and the philosophy and the language and the vocabulary of violence and non-violence? And while I agree with you, I think in the past some people have done tremendous work about trying to do exactly what we're trying to do now, and we can use whatever's possible from that.
I've got this video working now. If anyone, do you want to look at it, Brendan?
Oh, great! Yeah, thanks, Michael.
I think
this is a beautiful little 2-minute video clip that shows how integration and collaboration cross-culturally can bring a great message.
Okay, let's give it a go.
Give it a go.
There is no peace without peace education in Trinidad and Tobago.
No hay paz sin educación para la paz en Puerto Rico.
Achọghị nwe udo, a akụzi ndị mmadụ etu esi enwe udo.
भारत में शांति शिक्षा के बिना शांति संभव नहीं है.
पाकिस्तान को आगे बढ़ने के लिए हमारे फ्यूचर जनरेशन को अमन की तालीम देनी पड़ेगी हम लोगों को.
Nema mira bez mirovnog obrazovanja u Srbiji.
Δεν μπορεί να υπάρξει ειρήνη χωρίς εκπαίδευση για την ειρήνη στην Κύπρο.
Kıbrıs'ta barış eğitimi olmadan barıştan söz edemeyiz.
No hay paz sin educación para la paz en México.
There's no peace without peace education in the USA.
السلام في مصر يبدأ من التربية من أجل السلام.
Es gibt keinen Frieden ohne Friedenserziehung in Österreich, aber auch insgesamt überall auf der Welt.
No hay paz sin educación para la paz en Colombia.
Peace begins in me. Peace begins in you. Peace begins in Trinbago. Trinbago, peace to the world. Trinbago, peace to the world.
Thank you, Michael. Perseverance. So open to any other questions, comments that you have at this point?
I was just going to say, if I may, how important, these sorts of continuing these sorts of dialogues, because obviously in an hour, or I actually came in a little late because I was doing, among other things, I was looking at a range of children's books. So that took a bit of priority, I'm sorry. But the importance of ongoing dialogue and learning, so that's sort of the sharing of experiences, the insights that we have, how to create cultures of social and ecological peace, about processes that may be helpful at different levels and in different contexts, and that openness to, that hospitality to new ideas. I think that that's important. And what you actually said earlier about the importance of linking with issues that people are engaged with now, but in that process also hopefully deepening a sense of agency, a sense of active hope, in a time when we are faced with many problems. How to transition potentially, the value of non-violence, those sorts of ideas. In other words, context of hospitality. That's just my thought, and I come at that from having had a long experience in the area, working for a time as a peace education consultant, human rights education consultant in schools, and for many years also working at the university level in peace studies and so on. So, but now in that grouping you call retired. So but I think that generosity of spirit is actually really important for what we do, and a kind of sense of connection with other things. I mean, I think in the Australian context, there's so much to learn from Indigenous culture, and I think that notions of our own sort of sense of possibility. How do we actually create better worlds? And I think that futures dimension is quite important for peace education. So it's not just looking at the problems; it's also ways in which we can actually create a better world. And what that means in terms of values, what it means in terms of compassion, what it means in terms of love, and so on. So there's some quite important issues. And I'm sorry that I missed some of the earlier discussion, but I just wanted to touch base and say, well, I think the work that you're doing is very valuable.
Thank you. Thanks, Frank. Yeah, thank you.
I'm wondering if we might need to make it a wrap, everyone, because the organisers have just asked us to leave a breathing space between sessions, just so people don't get Zoom fatigued if they're moving to other things.
Okay. Yep. Thank you, Michael, for that. Thank you for hosting and doing the technology side of it. And thank you for showing up, everyone. It's been wonderful. And happy to have continue and have a conversation or other conversations by email or Zoom or phone or whatever with others. The more that we can keep spreading the good news of what we're trying to do and experiment and explore, the better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Peace be with you, folks.